What misconception did you have as a child that ended up being so insanely inaccurate that it blew your mind? I used to think an anti-caking agent was a government job. I wanted to be one when I grew up. I was sad when I realized it was actually a chemical which stops powders clumping together. Solving confectionery-based crimes would have been the best. I was a firm believer that I would one day be older than all my older brothers. I figured they'd just stop aging and I'd catch up. I used to think the gas prices displayed on the sign was literally the total sum, not the price per gallon. Everyone was so up in arms about gas prices and I was thinking, I could probably pay that. When they used to say things like, gas prices went up 10 cents or whatever, I always thought they meant that they had gone up to 10 cents. And I was like, why the heck is everybody complaining? It is still very cheap. When I was very young I thought people went onto the freeway just to race cars. The notion that we were doing it to travel quickly to another destination never even registered. I thought my mom wasn't very good because she would get past pretty often. Me too. My dad was the best because he overtook everybody and mum was really jealous because she'd tell him to slow down all the time. I would watch movies where a couple would stay at a hotel and one of them would get ice. They always needed ice, usually an underwear robe. I thought you needed a bucket of ice before you could have sex. Could never figure out the sex ice logistics. Cosmopolitan sex tips. I went to Catholic school, and I honestly thought there were just two religions, the Catholics and the publics. If you were a public, you went to public school, obviously. When I was little I used to think putting a string on a balloon made it float. I thought if you blew up a balloon with air then put a string on it, it would float. If you like it then you should have put a string on it. I used to think that aeroplanes were used to take you to places in the sky. My childish reasoning was that if planes were used to go up, then the destination must be somewhere high and unreachable any other way. For a few years I thought Spain was floating above the clouds, invisible to the naked eye. I also thought that children suddenly woke up one morning as fully grown adults, replete with beards, jobs and an interest in politics. That would be a horrible awakening one day. I was sure that salt and pepper would counteract each other until an embarrassingly advanced age. Food is too salty, add some pepper. I used to think that what race you are had nothing to do with your parents. Everyone just popped out random shades of person. When I was little, I asked my uncle the secret behind people getting shot in movies. It looked so real. I wanted to know how they did it. He told me that they found someone who looked similar to the actor, but who wanted to commit suicide, and they'd shoot him instead. Quite naturally, I believed him. In fact, I used to picture this room full of suicidal people waiting for their chance to be killed, and a director would come in and say, pointing, you look like so and so, come with us. What a bastard. You know how subdivisions advertise new houses from the 100s, 200s, 300s, right? I thought I could buy a house for $100 and didn't understand why my dad was dragging his feet on buying a house. My kid brain was like, I can buy 3 of them, let's do this. The day I learned about thousands was a rude awakening. Guerrilla war. I understood that various governments were arming the guerrillas, but was amazed that guerrillas could actually use machine guns with their big fingers. I had seen them ride horses and look pretty angry in Planet of the Apes, but that was surely fiction, wasn't it? I was so confused. I determined to just keep quiet about it whenever they were mentioned on the news. I thought the same thing. My grandparents were missionaries and in one country their bus was stopped by guerrillas and my grandpa talked them into letting them go. So when I heard this story as a kid I thought it was pretty cool my grandpa could talk to gorillas. Not quite what you asked, but when I was younger, I always thought that to behave meant being have. When my parents went out for a night and I had a babysitter, they would always tell me to behave. When they came back, I would always tell my parents that I was very have while they were away. My brother thought this, too. I remember we were out at dinner and he was being ornery and my mom told him to behave and he snapped I am being have. I am a bit late into the game, but I used to think that coconuts were animals. They were furry, they had milk. I was concerned that the store was not feeding them properly. I went to a lower school named Marshall. I was really into painting. drawing, etc. As a kid, mom asks if I want to sign up for martial arts after school with my older brother and sister. I show up expecting to learn to paint and whatnot. Everyone is in karate gear. I was pretty bummed. Me and my brother did taekwondo and had to spar for 20 minutes to raise money for charity. He thought it meant spar, that is lays in a hot tub for 20 minutes, haha. I thought hippos and rhinos were the same animals, but rhinos were the male of the species. When I found out that was wrong, I was shocked. Goats are not male sheep. I figured that one out first year university. I thought Michael Jackson and Michael Jordan were the same person for years. I was so confused when I saw a picture of M. Jackson post-op. So I asked my mom, really sheepishly, because I was taught about how bad it is to talk about race, which is another one for your if he used to be black. She said yes, which did not help. Mike Myers, the actor, and Michael Myers, slasher, had me mixed up and confused for far too long. I used to think that a doctor determined whether a baby was a boy or girl by whether or not he cut the umbilical cord all the way off. Imagine how much power that would be for one person to wield. You shall be a girl, while the parents anxiously look on awaiting the gender of their child. Going to the bank to get money. When my parents would say they didn't have enough money for something, I would say just go to the bank. I couldn't understand why this was so complicated for them. Whoa, how wrong I was. I had a similar misconception about death. When my grandma died and my mom told me about her death, while crying, I just shrugged it off, telling her to take her to the hospital. I thought doctors could fix everything. I used to think that going to a baby shower meant going to a literal shower and just washing babies. Needless to say, I was always very confused why other women would go to some shower just to watch a baby take a shower. I thought that the pregnant woman took a shower while everybody watched. I remember wondering how it was okay for so many people to watch a woman shower. My dad told me as a child that the cows that lived on the sides of hills were known as side hill cows. This type of cow had two legs that grew longer than the other, so they could walk around on the hills easier. I took this to be fact and didn't think about it until I was around 17 or 18 when I was looking at some cows on the side of a hill and had this thought. What happens when they turn to face the other direction? Do they fall down the hill? I made the mistake of asking this question out loud and in front of my friends, and well, you can imagine how that turned out for me. I will never live that down. My dad told me that teachers ran a paper cartel and that's why you had to always double space. I told others. I thought that my mother had an apparatus for making babies. I always asked her to give it to me so I can make myself a brother. Backstory: my mother had some kind of old portable studio for developing black and white pictures sitting on the wardrobe. When I noticed it was there, I asked her what it was. She said it's a photocopier, but I misinterpreted. I know this still doesn't make sense. Here is the explanation. In my language, she said AskReddit Stories, accent on O, roughly translated as apparatus for making copies, apparatus or machine. In my language, kids, plural form, is copy, accent on the first I, so I understood machine for making kids, copy, copies, copy, kids. I hope you understood my explanation and that the language barrier will not make it unfunny. D. Language barrier just made it funnier. At first I thought this was just a dumb kid thing, but it actually makes some sense. I thought that when the car would run out of gas it would explode. Whenever my mom said we needed more gas I would panic. Ironic that your car is actually constantly exploding and stops exploding when it runs out of gas instead. I thought white people were a small minority in the US. Even though I am white, my area was 85% Asian, my school even more so. When I was really little I thought my family was just part of a small group of people who were not normal looking, but who had certain types of special powers. I got the special powers part because a lot of cartoons were obviously drawn to look like white people, and some cartoon people have powers, ergo. Grew up when the war on drugs was in full swing. Then everywhere I went I'd see drug stores. I couldn't understand why they didn't just arrest the drug store owners. Strongly believed for so many years that traffic lights were operated by midgets sitting inside them. Never asked for clarification from my parents as it seemed the only possible way they could work. I thought drinking and driving referred to any liquid. I yelled about my mom drinking a soda just going down the street. Before I realized that women have vaginas, I always wondered how babies were born. Where did they come out of? Women always talked about how painful childbirth was, and the only other orifice that I could think of was a mouth. So, I assumed that babies were born by sticking a big pair of tweezers down someone's throat and pulling the baby out through the mother's mouth. I thought all babies had to be surgically removed. It never made sense to my younger self that people with brown skin were called black people. Clearly, they were brown, and white people were really kind of dull pink, not white. Then I learned about semen and it all made sense. White people had white semen, black people ejaculated black semen, Asians had yellow sperm, etc for every race, called such because sperm raced to fertilize the egg, and then I learned how wrong I really was. Felt really dumb. Mexican people have hot sauce as sperm. I assumed greenhouses caused greenhouse gases and was so confused why we couldn't just shut them down to fix the problem. I grossly misunderstood the concept of sex when I was a child. I was under the impression that if I was truly in love, tiny babies would crawl out of my penis and into the girl I liked. I would always make sure I was angry or sad when I peed to avoid having any babies tumble into the toilet. I didn't know you could breathe through your nose. I just thought that if I concentrated hard enough I could hold my breath forever. When my brother found this out he held his hand over my mouth and I thought I was going to die. I thought you crossed a body of water on a ferry, which confused me a lot as ferries in books were always tiny. They must have been super strong to carry cars and families all that way. A few years later I saw it written down. Alright, ferries. My dad told my brother and me that certain types of skin contact can transfer AIDS. I used to think you can contact AIDS if two people's butts contact each other. My brother's butt touched mine and I was telling him to wash the AIDS off. My dad told me that Freddie Mercury died of butt cancer. I got into an argument with a friend at college and I had a sudden Clarence moment. My friends still make fun of me for that. I used to think that once a girl got her period, she could get pregnant at any second. Just like that I didn't know about sex then. That terrified me. And because I was fast approaching puberty, I made a list of things I wanted to do before having a child, and tried my best to complete it within my remaining years. Anyway, I cried when I got my period for the first time. My mom couldn't stop laughing as she explained how conception worked. I used to think that all dogs were boys and all cats were girls. They referenced this on Community once, so I guess it must be common. That daylight savings time was something that naturally happened with actual hours going actually backward or forward in order for time to make sense. That the woods behind the house I grew up in were a huge, magical place. Going back as an adult, they are the dinkiest, shittiest woods ever. It was my imagination that was the magical place. It was my imagination that was the magical place. Well, that and everything seems bigger when you're small. I thought commercials were filmed live every time. Like they would get the actors and record a commercial every time they played it. How wrong I was. I thought that all sex had to take place in the hospital, with doctors watching behind a glass window. You go to the hospital to deliver a baby, so why wouldn't it be part of the whole process, you know? No idea why I imagined the creepy window, though. I thought airplanes were a type of bird whose wings didn't flap, and that they grew large enough for us to fly in. I didn't see an actual airplane in person until I was 9 or 10. An actual airplane, in person. That phrase made me picture a little kid walking up to a plane like, "Hi, nice to meet you." For some weird reason, when I was very young, maybe 7 or 8, I thought Jewish people were really primitive, like cavemen. The reason why is because, in CCD, religious education, when we were learning about other religions, we learned that Jewish people believed in God like us, but didn't know Jesus was the Messiah and were still waiting for a Messiah. So I thought that if they still didn't notice he came 2000 years ago, they must not have noticed electricity and cars and stuff being invented, and they still lived in clay huts with swords and sheep. Clay huts with swords and sheep. The fundamentals, then. I thought the car knew where we were going, because it always knew which blinker to turn on. I thought blinkers had no purpose other than for my parents to see if the car could guess which way we were going. I was amazed that it got it right every single time. When the woman who announces the lotto numbers would come on, she would introduce herself. I am Yolanda Vega. I always thought she was saying, I'm Yolanda Vega, as if this was the term for her position of announcing the lottery numbers. When I was little, my family hired a gardener named Arturo, and I thought he was Arturo and that Turo was his job title. When I was a young child, I used to think Aerosmith had a song called Cassius Clay. Turns out it was Walk This Way. Looking back, I have no idea why I thought that. It doesn't sound at all like Cassius Clay. I thought Walk Like an Egyptian was Walk Like a Big Chicken. I danced like a chicken when it came on and my dad would crack up. That life used to be in black and white, because old pictures and videos filmed didn't have color. D-Day was a big one. I feel so stupid for ever believing that. I used to believe that black and white photos used to be in color, but they faded into black and white because they are old. It made so much sense. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.